Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Friday afternoon to take the time out to learn, to save, invest, and prosper. In fact, at BTVI, our philosophy really has been in the last few years to help people to save, invest, and of course, retire rich or prosper in life. This is first of a number of shows that we'll be taking across the country to various organizations to help youngsters like all of you out here to eventually prosper in life. And to talk to us about that, to talk to us about how one should be, planning their finances, managing their wealth, retiring rich, we have with us two very special guests. In fact, both of these gentlemen on my right are veterans from the industry. They are leading names in the financial planning, wealth management business. On my right is Mr. Rakesh Rawal. He's the CEO of Anand Rathi, a veteran in the space for I think over 2 decades. And we also have with us Feroze Azeez of Anand Rathi. Thanks, Rakesh, and thanks, Feroze, for helping us bring this show together. To begin with, the average age in the audience, what I'm gauging, is about 25 to 27. Most of them are young, raring to go, lots of money to spend, lots of discretionary spending. But I want to start by asking both of you of why is it important for one to even consider a habit like saving?
Well, as we all know that there are times in life where our earnings are more than our expenditure. Now, is savings relevant there from a need perspective? No. I have enough money to spend and therefore there's no problem. But there will be a time in life, or there may be a time in life, when my earning is far lower than my expenditure, maybe non-existent. At which point in time my needs still have to be met. Where are they going to be met from? So if I don't save when I can save, how will I live? And therefore, it is absolutely mandatory that we should look at saving so as to make arrangements for ourselves when that particular time in life, we go through.
Right. So that is the reason why saving is extremely important for all of us, irrespective of what age we are at. Feroze, but I guess everyone in the audience is young enough and lucky enough because they have this opportunity and knowledge now of being able to save. Tell us why saving early is far more important than saving to begin with.
See, I think it's very important to first have the concept clear that we need to save, right? That's a practice which we need to inculcate, just like Rakesh mentioned, of why is it so important. The second is, when should you start saving? That's the next obvious question. Quite a few of us in the early parts of our life defer the process of saving because you have been out of college, you would want to celebrate the first 5-7 years of working, getting money, and so you defer savings. So the earlier the better. Why is it so? Because as Einstein said, the 8th wonder of the world is power of compounding. And the person who understands power of compounding earns from it. The person who doesn't understand pays for it. Now put some numbers in perspective. If you have 1 lakh rupees today, if invested for 10 years, become 3 lakh rupees. 1 lakh becomes 3 lakhs at the rate of 12%. The same 1 lakh, if kept for 20 more years, earns you 27 more lakhs and gets you to 30 lakhs. So 1 lakh in 10 years becomes 3. 1 lakh, the same 1 lakh, if kept for 30 years, becomes 30 lakhs. So the latter part, which is the 20 years, earns you 27 lakhs. And the first 10 years earns you only 2 lakhs. What is this phenomena called? Power of compounding. If, by the virtue of your age, if you have that in your favor, it will be ironical if you don't use it to your best advantage. So starting early is very critical. And if you put further and further numbers, it will perplex you of why and how surprising power of compounding could be.
Feroze, I think one of the common mistakes most of us make is that when we are setting those goals out, we prioritize them depending on time. So the nearest goal usually takes most priority. So maybe buying a car for some of us may be more important because it's more near-term in nature than retirement, which is 30 years down the line. But that, I believe, is actually the wrong way of looking at your goals, right?
Yes. So, Samina, exactly the myth which quite a few of us fall into the trap of. We arrange our order of goals not as per importance, but as per the time it will take to get there. Right? But it's not the right way of looking at it. You have to arrange them in the chronological order of importance. Of course, retirement being the farthest, it will take the least priority because you have so much time. But there are goals which you can be doing without, because retirement you will have to live on it. As the life expectancy is going up, you will have to live with that money for 20 years, 25 years, or 15 years, or 30 years. And that's an unknown territory because you don't know how long you're going to live after retirement. And not having a plan for that, when you have acclimatized yourself to a very high lifestyle, by the time you retire, you would have increased your lifestyle significantly more. Then you have to drop your lifestyle. That's going to be all, it will be very ironical that you worked so hard, got there, increased your lifestyle, but you don't have enough money to fulfill the same lifestyle for an unknown period of time. The most important point is you don't know how long after retirement each of us will live. We all have a finite life, naturally, but we don't know what that finite period is. So please arrange your goals not in the order of time, but in the order of importance. Okay, if you don't have a car in the medium term, it's okay. If you don't have discretionary spending, which Samina was indicating, it's okay, because if you buy a pair of shoes for 5,000 rupees, you're reducing your retirement corpus almost by 1,00,000 rupee. So you have to measure it on that fashion. So it's important to arrange them in the order of importance, not the time.
So while prioritizing your goals is important, Rakesh, we will talk about retirement in a little more detail, because that by definition becomes one of the most important goals for all of us in our lifetime. But just a few attributes, a few features that one needs to keep in mind while setting these goals out and ensuring you stick to them, because sometimes people may get confused between a goal which is realistic and which is aspirational. You know, we might put those goals down and not review them over a period of time. So can you give us more details of what one needs to keep in mind? Just 4 pointers that one can take away today and say, this is the way I'm going to set my goals and this is what I'm going to do in order to ensure they get met over a period of time. And goals, of course, are also evolving in nature, right?
I think, just think of there being a pilot who wants to go from destination A to destination B. Does he take off and go off to sleep? Perhaps not. If he does, then I think that there may be some disciplinary action against him. Yeah? So do you think that you start by the whole process of plan, okay, this is what I want, 30 years later, here's my machine which is started, and therefore now I'll open my eyes 30 years later. Are you likely to be at your destination? Unlikely to be. And therefore, I think it is critical that you have whatever you call as a review mechanism, which is put in place to see as to where you are headed, what corrective action you need to take, and reset things and re-engineer things so as to get there. So I think the most important thing is that you start on a journey with a goal point and a plan, traverse that plan. As you traverse it, review it and see whatever strategy or action that you are taking, is it adequate, does it need to change, and process the whole journey with information and correct action at various points in time. Yeah, so review mechanism of a goal of your journey is absolutely critical.
Also, we did talk about why retirement should be one of your most important goals. And I think everyone here, irrespective of what age we are at, we all want to retire rich. Everybody wants to, when they grow old, be able to play golf, travel the world, not have to worry about your day-to-day expenses. But how do we define retiring rich? That's, I think, the basis of it, right? So how do you say that one is rich enough and hence you can retire, or retire rich rather?
So retiring rich is all about having more than what you could spend, right? If you have an X amount of money you could spend, but if you have 4X, then it is rich. The definition of rich, retiring rich, is the differential between what you need and what you have. If what you have is greater than what you need, then you are retiring rich. Now, if you have to put some math to it, for somebody to calculate whether he has retired rich or not, especially when there is an unknown life expectancy, you can actually use this thumb rule, is whatever money you're left with at the end, if the interest earned on that will suffice your expense, then you are retiring rich. If I have 100 rupees, if I get an interest of 10 rupees every month, for example, if 10 rupees is sufficient enough, then it's sure certain that I'm retiring rich. So how do you compute it? If you have an expense of 100 rupees, divided by the interest rate, prevailing interest rate, if you have 100 rupees and if the interest rate is 10%, you need 10 times the money of your annual expense. Okay? I repeat, if you have 100 rupees, if interest rate is 10%, that means if your annual expense is 100 rupees, as long as you have 1,000 rupees, you're okay. The annual expense divided by the interest rate is the amount you need. And then you are sure certain that if you took your corpus, put it into an interest-bearing instrument also, which might not be the right strategy, even if you did that at zero risk, you will be able to take care of all your expenses.
Right. Just moving on from how one defines retiring rich, there are a number of attributes you need to keep in mind when you're planning and you're saving and investing for that retirement goal, which, like we've agreed upon, is one of your most important goals. So, Feroze, start by telling us, and Mr. Rawal, get into this conversation as well, the key attributes we believe are being disciplined, starting early, and consistency over intensity. That, I believe, is what's going to get you to your goal exactly the way you'd like to see it. So tell me about why being disciplined early on in life is one of the most important parameters.
Well, it is discipline. Let's define discipline. Discipline is that if you have set yourself a pathway of saying that I need to save 5,000 rupees a month, discipline is making sure every month you save 5,000 rupees. That's discipline. Now, if you give yourself an excuse not to spend that save that 5,000 rupees in month 1, and then find another excuse in month 3, and so on and so forth, do a simple math of what is it that you have damaged to your end point. The damage to the end point is 5,000 rupees compounded at 12% for 30 years. That's the cost that you have paid for that indiscipline for that 1 month. Right? So, therefore, I think that whatever you set for yourself, 5,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, whatever it is extremely important that you do that consistently and discipline yourself. Disciplining is, don't give yourself an excuse for not doing it. It doesn't belong to you. Take it that it doesn't belong to me. Like taxes. They don't belong to me. I just give it off. Similarly, this is a self-imposed tax of giving it into savings and doesn't belong to me, and plan your expenditures around something else.
Rakesh, on that one I want to ask you a question. So while we do know that retirement is your furthest away goals, there may be times and occasions in life where you might have to dip into your savings for an unforeseen circumstance, and your contingency fund may not be enough to fulfill that. Normal tendency would be to go into your retirement fund because that's the furthest away. Is that being indisciplined in nature?
Well, money in the bank or in your savings is not greater than the needs which you will go through in life, and therefore, if it is it's the importance of the goal is a health issue or whatever else there is to it, we need to first save ourselves. Then only I'm going to retire and live longer. So it's about, if you face contingencies, then obviously those contingencies take priority over life. There may be contingencies pertaining to yourself. There may be contingencies pertaining to various elements in your family, and so on and so forth. So obviously that takes priority at that point in time. Reset your goals. That is like an event that you hadn't planned for, a tsunami that's happened. Go through that tsunami, live it through, and then repeg yourself and then work towards getting to your goals, because nobody said that this pathway of 30 years is going to be smooth and a simple path. We embark on a plan based on our experience that, okay, let's move in this direction. But nobody is here forecasting for you that your 30 years of life is going to take this pathway. You have to have the review mechanism in place and have the ability to repeg things as you go through life. Does that mean that you shouldn't start saving now? Does that mean that you shouldn't start planning now? No, it doesn't mean that. We plan and then repeg as we go along.
We were talking about this earlier, right? So while one option is that you dip into your funds that you already have, but there could be other ways where you could fill the bridge or fill the gaps, right?
So, like Sir said, you will have to review what is the kind of seriousness of the requirement of money, and then repeg your goals. That's one. Second, fortunately, we are living in the world of being able to mitigate risks much before they hit us, if at all they hit us. So like, what is the maximum surprises you could get? And the ones which are non-compromisable are health issues for you and your family. So there are easy mechanisms, inexpensive mechanisms to top it all, to mitigate those risks. So if today you're spending 5,000-7,000 rupees a year to get yourself a family cover of medical insurance of 10 lakh rupees, it's well worth it, because if you're spending 7,000 rupees to get a family of 4 with 10 lakh rupee cover, fungibly usable between all the 4 family members, in 10 years I will end up spending 70,000 rupees, but my plan is far more secure now, right? So mitigating risks so that you don't need to is point 2. How do you mitigate risks? First, understand what are the risks. One is you live, but you have health issues. Second, you don't live long enough to be able to earn for your dependents when they are actually wanting to earn our dependence on the incomes which you have. Now, how ironical, again it's going to be, that you leave them with an emotional trauma and a financial trauma as well. So is it not wise to mitigate this risk by spending 20,000 rupees on a 1 crore rupee cover, or even lesser at the age in the mid-20s? So spending this 28,000 rupees to cover these 2 risks, in my opinion, is mandatory. Then the larger reason why people digress from their plan is taken care of. Now the third, even if after having mitigated these risks and you have requirements which are beyond our comprehension at this point in time, then you can also not disturb your plan and borrow against your investments. That's the best part of financial savings, that you can borrow at the least cost possible. Today's cost of borrowing on, for example, the conventional asset or a product like a mutual fund is as little as 8.5 or 8.75%. And you can borrow for a couple of months and then repay it without disturbing your plan. So those are the 3 things which come very handy when you're actually traversing this path and have surprises, and God has something which is not known to you at a point in time.
The main attributes to, of course, planning for your retirement, the keys, factors one needs to keep in mind is discipline, which we cannot stress upon more. Starting early as today, so go back home, look at your numbers, start planning your finances. We seriously urge you to do that at a younger age. And also, of course, consistently do that. So consistency over intensity. So you rather invest 5,000 rupees every month than do a lump sum investment once every few years. I think the fruit that bears is eventually much less than what consistency does. And I think the other mistake a lot of people do is they get caught in the season or the flavor of the month. We are talking about Bitcoin today, and we seem so excited about Bitcoin. But reality is that equity markets, financial products, which we'll talk about in the next few episodes, what you also want to keep in mind is don't try and time your investments. It's the time spent, which I've heard more than once from both of you, is what's actually most important, right? It's the time spent as opposed to timing the market.
Absolutely. Timing the market by definition is short term. Any market, it's short term. Today I want to enter the market and tomorrow it's going to go up or go down. And therefore, what is the period of investing? The period of investing is 3 days. Your goal is 30 years and your strategy is 3-day strategy. Do you see the inconsistency in the whole thing? If you have a goal of 3 days and you've got a 3-day strategy, I can understand. But if my goal is 30 years and I employ to achieve that goal a strategy which is a 3-day strategy, am I likely to be successful? So therefore your strategy has to be consistent with your goal, which is long-term in nature, and therefore you have to have long-term trends which you have to look at and see as to what is likely to give you maximum or best quality returns on a long period of time, right? And not be worried about timing and so on and so forth. And as Samina said, time spent, where we talked about compounding. Allow the compounding to happen. It takes time. There's no shortcut, right? That's what you need to do.
So while it's tough quantifying what corpus you're going to need when you retire, I think it might be easier to tell our audience of how much money should one allocate towards each goal of theirs. So I guess quantifying it in a percentage term might just be a little more helpful, because then we're giving them a plan. It's not as if one plan is going to fit everybody's needs, but a more broader sort of parameters that we can look at, where you say X amount should be invested towards a goal which is 3 years from now. X percentage should be invested for maybe goals that are 10, 15 years away.
So how do you allocate your total savings across these 3 baskets? Short-term, medium-term, long-term. In my opinion, the long-term ones, you have to allocate a fair portion. Quite a few of the plans, when we see them, have very little allocation to the long-term, especially the younger generation, because of the virtue of being short-sighted in nature. So consciously, at least 50% of your money, which is being saved, needs to be in the long-term category. What are the long-term goals? If you are not married and if you don't have children, then your long-term goal is largely retirement. If you have dependents and you expect to have dependents, then your long-term goals will have child's education, child's marriage. So I think these long-term goals should at least consume 50% of your total savings, and at least 30% of the total income should be savings. So 30% of your total income, if somebody is earning X, at least 0.3x should be his saving or her saving, and half that should be in the long-term category, if not more. So that's a good rule. And before we get to saving, it's important to do expenditure after you have done savings. People generally save what is left. You spend what is left after saving is a better strategy.
The toughest strategy to follow in life. But also, we must remember that these goals and priorities are not cast in stone. So it's not as if you're going to go back home today, put these goals down and, revisit them 20 years later. They're constantly evolving. You have new priorities in your life. You'll get married. You'll have children. You may have a new job. You may have, you'll start earning some more money. So go back and revisit your goals as often as you can. I think a good way of doing that is annually, biannually. What is it that you'd recommend?
Well, I think one is, of course, on the basis of an event that happens which changes things. And I think looking at things on an annual basis is reasonable. After all, looking at things, a plan like this is not something which will take you a full day. It just is a simple exercise that you can do in a few hours. And therefore spending a few hours and revisiting the goal for yourself and reassuring yourself that you're on the right path is worthwhile to do on an annual basis at least.
And I think, I don't know whether we've talked about this, but this is, it should also be, your family members should be involved, because in cases like these, it's much easier to fulfill goals if everybody is on the same page and, you get your goals down, make it an annual event where everybody puts down what's important, and then that sort of helps achieving those goals easily. We've talked about a financial plan. We've talked about why savings is important, why your goals are important, and why, of course, retirement is the most important goal. But what are the products available, Feroze, that one can look at while investing towards their retirement goal?
So, Samina, it's right. Of course, after you've got your goal quantified, plan, you're committed to planning. It's important to get into product, but one step back, if we also look at what's the kind of asset allocation we'll have to do, then our product selection on the different assets is going to be correct. So asset allocation is nothing but a simple concept of allocating your money to different assets. Okay? It's important to understand that there are only 4 assets and the rest of them are all distractions. Right? What are the 4 assets? There are 2 risky assets or growth assets on a more positive note. Growth assets and 2 protection assets. 2 growth assets are equity and real estate, and 2 protection assets are deposits or debt, as they call it in a technical nomenclature. Deposits and gold are safer assets. Growth assets are real estate and equity. So as you have time frames greater than 5 years, equity has to form 80% plus. 20% could be debt. Real estate and gold. Real estate at this stage should be limited to consumption, looking at the contemporary situation. And gold, in our opinion, is not a very good asset class to be invested over long periods of time unless there's an ornamental value to it. So 80 and 20 if you have greater than 5 years, and most often than not you have your medium-term goals also after 5 years. So at least 80% in equity for a youngster, young lady or gentleman is important. The product bit, of course, the core product has to be mutual funds. I think mutual funds are several types, but at least a large portion of my money, if I was you, would be definitely in mutual funds for the fact that it's the most transparent, most inexpensive, most professionally managed and regulated industry in the financial space, or in any other space for that matter. If you look at all the 4 assets, the most transparent and regulated mechanism or vehicle or the product to participate in is a mutual fund, and nobody can take away from that.
But I think, Rakesh, you might want to come in on this one. So while product selection is important, I think in the bigger picture, selecting the right asset class is probably a lot more important. Retail investors usually get confused and get caught up on a product as opposed to, getting their asset allocation right.
Well, the difference is now if you've got a long-term debt return of 8% and long-term equity index return of 15-16%. Now, isn't it logical that if you don't get your proportion of what you have to do into equity and what you have to do into debt right, your returns can't be made up by just selecting a great product? If your asset allocation is wrong, so if a person, for example, chooses 20% in equity and 80% in debt, his equity, some product, some great product is not going to give him fantastic return which can overcome the burden of 20% equity having to do 80% of the work. Is that doable? And therefore, you cannot substitute the work of asset allocation with product. Get the asset allocation right, that's your first step. Within that asset allocation, get sensible, simple products like Feroze mentioned in the basket of things, and let compounding sort of work for you over a period of time. And not be, as Samina said, be digressed with timing. Let the time elapse. Allow it to elapse. And when you allow it to elapse, the fruits will automatically come.
Also, this was, I'm just going to drop in the last question here. How important do you think is for, retail investors or the audience that's here or somebody like me to seek help of a financial advisor? Because a lot of this that we've talked about makes perfect sense, but putting it into action is where the challenge is.
See, of course, in anything important of our life, do we take professional help? We more often than not do, right? So is money important? If the question is yes, are goals important to be met? If the answer is yes, then why not take professional help to enhance the probability of meeting the goals? Now, having an advisor by your side has 2 things. One is, of course, he brings knowledge to the table or she brings knowledge to the table. The other thing is you need sometimes an external push to do things which are not going to come naturally to you. Right? As human minds are not wired to do the most logical things automatically. So you need some external push for an inertia to be overcome inside yourself. So these are the two primary purposes which an advisor can fulfill for you. Now the question which rises in people's mind is, what comes first? Do I earn enough money, then I have an advisor? Or first I get an advisor and then I get the money? Right? The fortunate part is advice in India is available relatively cheaper. If it was an emerged market, people would charge you about £100, for example, for hours of discussion. Right? Here it comes relatively cheaper. Services are cheaper in India. That's the reality of it is. And if you don't benefit from it, then it will not be too prudent. So advisor should be there as a start point for knowledge and to give you that push, which will definitely be needed, because it's not going to come naturally, because it's not a pleasant thing to do to save money. But of course, it's so much more pleasuresome to walk into a mall over the weekend and shop, right? So you'll need some external push for it. So advisor is important in my view.
Covered most aspects of setting your goals and of course setting a plan in place. We'll open the floor to the audience, the questions for the audience. If anyone has anything, any queries, any questions, bring it on. It's not often that you're going to get these two gentlemen on a podium answering questions.
I'm Rasila, and my question is that what is the most important factor to be kept in mind when setting up goals?
So, Rasila, what are the important aspects to be kept in mind when you're actually planning for a goal? Of course, to summarize, we'll discuss some portion of it. One is quantify it, put a number to it. That's a very important aspect. The second thing is to factor in inflation. Inflation is nothing but the fall in the power of money due to time progressing. Mengai, price rise, synonyms to the same thing. Second aspect. Third is to work backwards and see what do I need to save today to meet that goal. So monetizing the value of the goal, that will require inflation and correct inflation, not incorrect inflation. And lastly, what is the money needed per month for me to achieve that goal? So these are the three important things we have to take care of.
I'm Sarita, lead QA of Checklist Enterprise Solution. I listened to the talk, it was really informative. I know down three doubts. Okay. So one, I want to know what should be the asset allocation for my short, mid and long-term goals. And another one I want to know, is there any mutual fund or SIP that provide insurance coverage as well? Then my third question is, I invested in an SIP, okay, but how do I assure the steady growth? Like I'm investing every month maybe 5,000 or 10,000. After 10 years, if I realize, no, I didn't mistake, how do I know that it is in the right direction?
As far as asset allocation is concerned, we discussed upon that for long-term goals you need to have
80% in equity. Yeah? And why is that so? Because you've got long periods of time. The volatility risk of equity on a long period of time is very low. And therefore, if you have more allocation of money to that asset class, you're likely to make much more return. For example, the index has, over the last 30 years, given a return of 15-16% as against deposits of 7-8%. So if you want to participate in that growth of your capital, then you have to allocate more money to that particular asset class. Right? So asset allocation is really dependent on how long that period is and what your goal that you want to achieve. What kind of, you want to be a rich retired person, then you need to take that into cognizance, and therefore it's more dependent on what your desire is. Okay?
Rakesh, I just want to ask you a follow-up on her question. You know, as you get closer to your goals in life, do you sort of revisit your asset allocation? So while your long-term goals are 80% equity exposure, but as those goals get closer to you, do you start sort of changing that asset allocation around?
You have to do that, and therefore it also depends on what it has resulted in, right? And you might find yourself that you are in the rich category. If you're in the rich category, then the dependence on this money comes down, because you have, like Feroze said, 10 times more capital than you actually require. So that the financial position of a person changes, and therefore your ability to take risks at that point in time changes. So you have to, take into cognizance what the financial situation is, and then take risks accordingly. At this point in time, we know that it is long term. We need to be more in the area of equity than in the area of safe assets.
So you had two other questions. One of them, of course, was, is there a systematic investment plan which tags along insurance as well? So the answer is yes. There are systematic investment plans which give you a free insurance as a motivation to attract more people investing in those funds which actually have a tag-along insurance. But in my opinion, insurance is a subject which will not be addressed by any of these free goodies or motivations or marketing strategies by systematic investment plan mutual funds, because that requires to have a greater detail kind of a plan. Because if I have my liabilities significantly more than the assets I have, I can't leave liabilities to my dependents, so I have to bridge this gap using insurance. So insurance is so inexpensive and has become even more inexpensive in the last 3 years because of competition in insurance companies, that 18,000, 17,000 rupees is the cost per annum to buy yourself a 1 crore rupee insurance cover on life at the ages of 25, 30. And that is a very, very important thing to do, irrespective, and not decide your investment. And the prime requisite to invest in a mutual fund through a systematic investment plan is definitely not going to be motivated by this insurance tag along. So please don't get digressed by some freebie, because the performance of that money is far more critical than this. You can serve this purpose very easily separately, then try and color your decision on the basis of this. Third question which you asked was, how do I know whether I'm on the right SIP system? I might invest in a mutual fund, and then after 5 years I realize, I see shows, I see Google tells me there are other funds which are doing better. Should I remove from that fund and go to another fund? Of course, like Rakesh mentioned in a little while back, that a review is very critical, and review takes a few hours every year. What do you review in it? You review your asset allocation, depending on how things have changed internally from your risk appetite perspective. Then you review what are the products which require some degree of mending. You mend those products. Of course, a review on your systematic investment plan done requires an annual frequency, not a 10 years from now. And funds have to be modified depending on who's the fund manager, what is he doing, has the fund manager moved on. So it requires product review is also as critical as asset allocation review, but the primary is of course asset allocation, then comes product.
Hi, this is Shivang. So my question is, how frequently should I review my goals?
As we said, that reviewing of your goals is to a large extent dependent on any life event that happens. So if you're today, like Feroze said, that if you're married, if you're not married, then you look at retirement. Then there will be life events that will happen. You'll get married, there'll be children, there is condition of your parents, may not be dependent, may be dependent. So as life sort of pans itself out, classify events into, is this a large event that has happened? If a large event has happened, I think you should take cognizance of that, and then sit aside and review whether the goals that you've set for your financial plans are relevant or something needs to be added on or subtracted.
So I have a PPF account. To what extent in long run it will help me in my savings?
So PPF is basically like a deposit. It gives about 8% return. It's a debt instrument, right? So if my asset allocation is 80% equity and 20% debt, then PPF account is working in the area of the debt allocation. So it'll be more in terms of creating safety rather than creating large values of wealth for you. It is the equity part that will create large values for you. So get your asset allocation right. So whatever you are saving, get your asset allocation right and allocate only the percentage that you have decided for debt into instruments like PPF.
Hi, I'm Harish. I'm from HR team. I have a question. Imagine that I have a loan liability. How soon I can pay off? And there is one more question. If I am investing on any property currently, should I consider the current income? The second one, if I have to invest in a property or any thing I have to buy now, should I currently plan it on the current income?
So Harish, your first question of trying to say whether should I actually settle my home loan or let my investments parallelly run, because if I have some additional corpus, I can reduce my loan, bring down my EMIs. What is the better strategy? See, if you are of a lower age group, I would suggest that home loans are the least cost loans. As long as there is a large propensity for my investments to deliver more than that 8.5%, which is the contemporary interest rate which home loans today be penalizing the borrower for, I would definitely want to run my investments parallelly with my home loans being serviced by monthly salaries rather than the lump sum amounts which I've already accumulated. So point one, if things change 5 years, 10 years from now and interest rates are right up there, which is unlikely, but if it so happens, then I would want to settle my loan and not have investments. But looking at the next 3, 4, 5 years, we are, as an economy, going into a lower interest rate kind of a phase. I would rather let my home loan live and investments live along. Question one. Question two is, should I borrow more and invest in real estate? If there is more limit, if a banker is already ready to give me on my current salary more money to borrow, can I buy myself a second home? The answer is a big no. Of course, real estate gives you some degree of tangibility, that you have the comfort that I'll buy property, but looking at how things will pan out in this area, and if it's a writing on the wall, in my opinion, that real estate is one asset class which cannot deliver very high returns even after a 10-year holding period, especially residential real estate in India, because the supply is humongous. As much as 9 lakh apartments are constructed and to be sold in Indian 6 cities of India. With that kind of supply, basic economics says that if supply is high, demand is low, the prices can't go up. This is basic economics. So the point being made here is, will I want to venture out borrowing money and investing in real estate is a big no-no, and that trap can really put all your goals out of your plan completely.
Right. So talking about real estate, if you already are invested in real estate, and real estate, as we know, is stagnating, what would be your advice?
Well, I classify real estate into 2 categories. One is what I call as aspirational real estate. Are those real estate pieces which are where I live in, or the ones that the family wants to spend a weekend, or it's serving some purpose, yeah, other than investing. And the other part of real estate is that it is there because it's an investment piece, right? And therefore it's supposed to give me some return. Rental yields are down to a couple of percentage points. So therefore, if my aspiration is to grow my money at 12, 13%, and if I'm getting 2% at rental yield, then I have to have an appreciation of 10, 11%, which is completely unlikely. And therefore, if I exit that and invest into something that is going to give me 12% or 13%, I'll meet my aspirations or goals of getting 12% return. Keeping it there is unlikely to meet my aspirations. So therefore, for real estate pieces which are in my investment category, I need to do some serious review and see whether it will meet my investment goals or not. If not, I need to act.
Hi, I'm Saurabh, and my question is about risk. So, like it is said, the risk is there for everything, and whether it's a long-term investment or a short-term. So when it is a short term, we have like we can make a short investment, and also the risk time is also less. But when it is a long term, we are continuously investing, and the risk can be huge. So what you will say for that?
Well, the math of risk is just the reverse. You know, there is short term, risk is high, and long term risk is low. Right? And how do you define risk? Risk is what kind of change of return that you get in so whatever periods of time of that asset class. So supposing you have a 1 year period in equity, you would have got in the index as high as 200 odd % return, or you could have lost 50% of your capital, right? But when you look at it on a 10-year basis, that if you have invested it for a 10-year period, the return that you can get is 20-25% on the upside, and on the low side for the Nifty it is as low as 7%. So is the risk high long term or is the risk low long term is a question that we need to address. The numbers are saying that if you keep an asset class for long periods of time, your risks reduce, right? Obviously, there is something called event risks. Now, what kind of events will play out in whose life and what kind of change it'll create to the world, and therefore what will be the value of various assets at that point in time, nobody can say. But based on historical data, this is how risk has played out. Short-term high, long-term low.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? I think we're good. Just passing closing remarks from Rakesh and Feroze, the key takeaways one needs to keep in mind. Wrap this up in 30 seconds.
Well, to my mind, there's a massive opportunity of compounding that is awaiting young people, right? And therefore, not using that compounding opportunity in the changing India that is likely to unfold itself over the next 10, 20, 30 years is not being fair to yourselves. Therefore, keep that in mind and make sure that you go through the process of financial planning and grab that opportunity fully. Yeah?
So I would want to wrap it up with a quote which I'd heard, but I don't know the person who's actually said this quote, but yeah. It's not what you would do once in a while which will shape our lives. It's what we do consistently which will shape it. So it's important to take up a task and do it consistently to be able to get something out of it. So I would say that consistency, which I'm sure Samina has already emphasized upon, would be my last closing remark on this one.
With that, we're completely out of time on this special series that we're running across the country on financial planning, where we will help all of you to learn how to save, invest, and prosper. All of you have been a very supportive audience. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rakesh and Feroze, for joining us today.